densest use of cluster bomblets in the history of humanity. If you're young, you're Jewish, you're idealistic, you're liberal, you don't want to have to defend that in an audience like this. Or if we take 3 years ago, literally today, when Israel is inflicting what Amnesty International called 22 days of death and destruction in Gaza, 22 days of death and destruction, Israel dropped white phosphorus, a substance that reaches 800 degrees centigrade, 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. It dropped white phosphorus on 2 hospitals in Gaza, Al-Quds Hospital, Al-Wafa Hospital. You're young, you're idealistic, you're liberal, you're Jewish. You don't want to have to defend that. Now, there are some people who will defend it. Actually, all the current presidential candidates in the Republican Party would probably eagerly want to defend it. Or if you're the offspring of a Rush Limbaugh or of a Sean Hannity, the right-wing radio commentators, yeah, you would defend it. But there are some people who will defend breaking the kneecaps of nuns. That's the way humanity is. There's a broad cross-section. But if you're Jewish, you don't really want to go there. It's just not a Jewish thing. And the last major development is the fact that American power, obviously it hasn't reached a nadir, but American power is now on the decline. It can't get everything it wants, everywhere it wants, whenever it wants. Those times have passed. And since the U.S. has been the main obstacle, the main obstruction to resolving the conflict, that's certainly a positive development. And you saw it during the UNESCO debate on admitting Palestine to UNESCO. The Americans did not want to be isolated. Barack Obama was twisting arms, turning the screws. He wanted to be surrounded by some other countries as he tried to block Palestinian entry into UNESCO. And it's worth it if you have the time, if you're interested in the drama of politics. And sometimes politics can be, I don't mean the silly presidential elections, things like that, but politics can be quite traumatic and morally energizing. If you go to the YouTube and you turn to that UNESCO debate, it was actually quite a treat to watch. The executive director of UNESCO was an extremely dignified woman, very impressive and articulate, and she conveyed the moral seriousness of the occasion. And while she was laying out what's at stake in this debate in the UNESCO, the president of UNESCO was sitting right next to her, and she's gasping and choking and reaching for her water and breathing so heavily. And she was wearing this ravishing ruby red dress, and she had this beautiful bouffant hairdo, and you could see that she's thinking, my salary is at stake in this debate, because the U.S. is threatening to cut all of its financial support for UNESCO. And you could see by her demeanor that she needed every last cent of that salary. And then the vote came. China, yes. Venezuela, of course, emphatic yes. Then it came to Germany, no. And there was a kind of dead silence in the chamber. But then it came to Austria, and Austria says, yes! And everybody in the audience is thinking, Austria is voting the way Germany wants to vote, were it not for the Nazi Holocaust, because there's no difference between Austria and Germany. They're the same country, really. No, they are. The joke, as some of you might know, is Austria has managed to convince the world that Hitler was German and Beethoven was Austrian. It's the reverse for those who don't know. And then it came to France, and France said, oui, yes. And it later turned out that Mr. Obama was very angry at Sarkozy for voting yes. And then it came to America's poodle, namely the UK. And the UK abstained. They did not vote no. It was very surprising. Even the UK broke ranks now with the United States. The most interesting was Israel. When they came to Israel, the representative, he looked around the room, threw his hands up in despair, and goes, no. It was like, folks, I have to vote no. I'm Israel. But you could see his heart was not in it. It was not. Now, you can watch it for yourself and discuss in the argosy if there's space available below the cowgirls section. You can discuss amongst yourselves. Watch the video and see if I've accurately depicted it. That, at any rate, is what my memory tells me, but you know memories can be tricky. So what does that tell us? In fact, it tells us something very important. Namely, there is now a broad public that's ready to listen. Even in Canada, there is a broad public that's ready to listen. They know that there's something seriously awry in that part of the world. That's number one. Number two, they've grown weary, W-E-A-R-Y, weary of this soap opera of tragic dimensions that has gone on longer than for older people in the world as the world turns. It goes on and on and on. And three, they recognize now, for the first time in the history of the conflict, they recognize that Israel bears a large burden of culpability for that conflict. They're not at the point where they'll say Israel bears the full culpability, but they're certainly at the point now, the broad public, which is willing to acknowledge and wants to acknowledge that Israel bears a significant burden of responsibility for what's going on. And now I think the challenge is people are willing to listen. You have to now present a message that will resonate with that broad public, that will convince them that this is the way to go to end the conflict. If you don't present a convincing solution, a solution that will persuade a broad public, if you don't present a convincing solution, then they will just give up in despair and frustration and turn their attention elsewhere. If you come up with a formula for resolving the conflict which doesn't resonate with people, resonate's just a fancy word for doesn't make sense to people, then you lose them. They'll just say, oh, this conflict, you can't solve it. Let's just focus on things we can solve. So our challenge now is to come up with a solution which the public will react positively to, and then galvanize that public, and as I said, do what really needs to be done. At this point, it should have been done ages ago, but it couldn't be done because people weren't ready to listen, and you felt like you were howling in a wilderness when you tried to get people to listen. But which I think can be done now if we come up with the right formula for trying to reach the public and to get them to act. Well, what is that formula? It's the title of my remarks this evening. And I myself pondered for a long time, what is the formula that can reach people? Because unfortunately, what's called the Palestine support movement is fragmented and fractured, and there are all of these internecine conflicts about what's the right formula. It's very sectarian, and in my opinion, speaking as someone past midnight, it's in many respects rather infantile. So what is the right formula? I'm trying to figure out an answer to that question. A couple of years ago, I sat down and I started to read through the collected works of the Mahatma, Mr. Gandhi, because I thought he was a very shrewd politician, and he probably had something worthy to say in the topic, because in many ways he confronted a similar challenge to the Palestinians. He wanted to end an occupation, in his case the